Something happened in the skies over Israel that nobody explained to you correctly. And the version you were given, the version with the high intercept percentages and the press conferences about minimal damage, that version is missing the one number that actually determines how this ends. That number is not how many missiles Iran fired. It is how many interceptors Israel has left. Let me show you why that distinction is the difference between a story about a war and a story about whether a country can defend itself at all. Nevatim Air Base is in the southern Israeli desert, about 15 kilometers east of Beersheba. You need to know what is inside it to understand why everything happening right now matters as much as it does. 3 full squadrons of F-35 stealth fighters, aircraft so advanced they can fly over Iran without showing up on Iranian radar. These planes are the reason Iran cannot simply be bombed at will without American approval. They are Israel's long arm, the thing that makes every threat credible. And they are all sitting at Nevatim, in hangars, behind runways that have now been struck in 4 separate Iranian operations. Since April 2024, Iran has been running a campaign against this base that has gone from symbolic to surgical in under 2 years. And the most alarming part of it is not the damage to the hangars or the craters in the tarmac. It is the rate at which Israel and the United States have had to spend their most advanced defensive missiles to stop it, missiles that take years to manufacture and are now being consumed faster than they can be replaced. Here is the timeline in the fastest version I can give it to you. April 2024. Iran launches roughly 350 projectiles at Israel. A coalition of 5 countries intercepts 99% of them. 5 missiles hit Nevatim, minimal damage. The world calls it an Iranian humiliation. What actually happened? Iran studied every single interception, watched how fast each battery responded, measured where the radar coverage had gaps, filed the data. October 2024, Iran comes back with a smarter attack. This time, over 30 missiles hit Nevatim. A hangar roof is punched through. Another Israeli base sees secondary explosions in areas that independent analysts believe are connected to weapons storage. The penetration rate jumped from 1.5% to nearly 20% in 6 months. June 2025, a 12-day war. Over 550 ballistic missiles launched at Israel. 6 direct hits on 5 military facilities. The ceasefire gets announced, and a senior American defense official quietly admits to multiple journalists that the real question was how long the interceptor stockpile would last, not whether the military objectives had been achieved. February 28, 2026. Iran opens Operation True Promise 4, 162 ballistic missiles in the first barrage, and this time they are firing at American and Allied bases in the Gulf simultaneously, designed to drain the entire Western defensive inventory at once. That is the sequence. Now here is what it means for you, and for everyone watching the news coverage that keeps showing you explosions and saying, most missiles were intercepted. The interceptors doing the intercepting are not infinite. The Arrow 3, the system that stops the big, long-range ballistic missiles before they re-enter the atmosphere, costs about $2 million per shot. The missiles it stops cost Iran roughly $400,000 to $800,000 each. Every time the defense works, the defender spends more than the attacker. That math is already bad, but the worse math is the manufacturing math. The factories that build Arrow 3 interceptors are not running at wartime speed. They cannot. The components are too specialized. Some of the materials they require come from supply chains that run through China, which has been restricting relevant exports. The lead time on restoring depleted stocks is measured in years, not months. In the October 2024 engagement, one single night, Israel used between 60 and 70% of its available Arrow 3 interceptors in one night. By the time the June 2025 war started, the inventory had not fully recovered. By the time that war ended, With a ceasefire that official statements called a military success, the inventory was lower still. And now we are in a third consecutive major escalation, with Iran applying the regional saturation strategy it has been developing, draining not just Israel's batteries, but American batteries in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan at the same time. This is what military planners call an asymmetric cost exchange. The attacker can produce offensive missiles faster than the defender can produce defensive ones. The attacker is willing to lose platforms and older hardware to force the defender to keep spending the advanced interceptors. The attacker's goal is not to destroy the target in the first wave or the second wave. The goal is to make sure that by the time the target is vulnerable, the defense is empty. That is the doctrine Iran has been refining for 2 years, and it is working. Receipt 1. The numbers on paper look like Israeli victories. The IDF announced in the first week of the current operation that it destroyed 300 Iranian launch platforms and achieved a 70% drop in daily incoming fire. That sounds like success. Here is what it actually is. Israel spent years' worth of manufactured interceptors to achieve a 70% suppression of a threat that, at 30% capacity, can still send dozens of missiles at a time toward the same base. The interceptors that were consumed to reach that result cannot be replaced during this conflict. They will not be back in inventory by the time the next escalation arrives. Iran built this calculation into the strategy from the beginning. Receipt 2. Iran's newest missiles are not the same missiles that were fired in 2024. The Fatah series and the Qatar Shakan 4 carry something called a maneuvering reentry vehicle, a warhead that changes direction in the last few seconds of its descent, specifically designed to dodge the interceptors sent to destroy it. When Israel fires an Arrow 3 at a normal ballistic missile in the middle of its flight path, the intercept probability is around 89%. When the warhead starts swerving at the last second, that probability drops to as low as 65%. The system that is supposed to handle this problem, the Arrow 4, is still being tested. It is not deployed at Nevatim in the numbers that would be needed to close this gap right now during this operation. Receipt 3. Something keeps happening at Telnof Air Base that nobody in the mainstream press is pressing for a clear explanation of. Telnof is separate from Nevatim. It has been struck in every major Iranian operation since 2024, and after each strike, there are secondary explosions, meaning things inside the base are catching fire or detonating after the initial impact. The Israeli military describes the damage as affecting maintenance areas and office buildings. Analysts at the Federation of American Scientists, along with independent researchers who study Israel's nuclear posture, consistently assess Telnof as one of the locations where Israel stores its nuclear weapons, under the country's long-standing policy of neither confirming nor denying their existence. Secondary explosions in a nuclear weapons storage area are not a minor news item. They are a scenario that every arms control treaty and strategic stability framework in the world was written specifically to prevent from becoming uncontrollable. And the press is not asking what is actually burning. Here is what the daily briefings keep leaving out. The story of this conflict is not the story of missiles versus interceptors on any given night. It is the story of a manufacturing race that only one side can win. Iran has restructured its missile production specifically to output more offensive hardware than the Western alliance can produce defensive hardware to stop it. The production schedule for an Arrow 3 interceptor is a multi-year pipeline. The production schedule for an Iranian ballistic missile is a fraction of that. As long as Iran is willing to keep launching, and the evidence of 4 consecutive operations suggests they are, the ledger moves in one direction only. General Dan Kane, the most senior American military commander in this theater, confirmed publicly that the United States has been drawn into active intercept operations at a rate exceeding peacetime resupply capacity. He said this in the language that senior military officers use when they want to convey a warning without causing public alarm. What he was actually saying is, We are spending this resource faster than we are making it, and we do not have an easy fix for that. The people living under this in Israel are not a background detail. They are the reason the strategic calculus matters. Families in Tel Aviv who watched over 40 buildings damaged in a single day of strikes in early March 2026. A residential tower in northern Israel struck directly. Cluster munitions, weapons that scatter over a wide area and are specifically designed to make each individual submunition harder to intercept, deployed over the country's industrial heartland. These families were told the sky was protected. They were not told that the protection was a stockpile. They were not told that the stockpile had a bottom. They were not told that the adversary had spent 2 years figuring out exactly how to find that bottom and push toward it. The Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements between Israel and Gulf Arab states that were celebrated as a generational diplomatic achievement, were built on a security guarantee. Not an explicit written one, an atmospheric one. The guarantee was that American-backed air defense made the region safe enough to do business with Israel. That atmosphere is now being tested in real time by secondary explosions at suspected nuclear storage sites, by cluster munitions over civilian areas, and by a senior American general confirming that his forces are spending defensive missiles faster than they can be made. Gulf officials are watching this. They are doing the math. The atmosphere that made those accords feel permanent is not feeling permanent anymore. Israeli Chief of Staff General Herzi Halevi announced that 60% of Iran's missile launch capacity has been destroyed. He presented this as the measure of Israel's success. The remaining 40% represents thousands of ballistic projectiles operated by a command structure that has spent 2 years learning how to use a smaller number of missiles to accomplish more than a larger number accomplished before. The cost of reaching 60% destruction was paid in interceptors that cannot be replaced before this conflict ends. That is not a victory condition. That is a price paid for a position that is still dangerous. 3 things will tell you everything about where this goes next. If the U.S. Department of Defense announces emergency interceptor resupply to Israel in the coming days, the depletion has crossed the line where it can be managed quietly. If Israeli air defense posture visibly shifts to prioritizing civilian areas over Nevatim, the military has made a formal triage choice, protecting people over protecting the planes. And if commercial satellite imagery over Nevatim or Telnof shows unexpected cloud cover on a clear day, a government has made a decision about what you are allowed to see. The version of this story you were given was about a sky full of intercepted missiles and a defense system that always wins. The version that actually determines the outcome is about a manufacturing schedule, a supply chain that runs through China, and a 2-year patience campaign designed to make the best defense system ever built run out of the thing it cannot run out of. The interceptors are working. The strategy is failing. And by the time most people understand the difference, the relevant decisions will already have been made. If this breakdown gave you what the headlines keep skipping, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next development in this story is not going to be announced at a press conference. It is going to be a number that somebody somewhere decides not to release, and the silence around that number will tell you more than any official statement ever will. Tell me in the comments, do you think Israel and the U.S. have enough interceptors left to see this conflict through? Or is the next ceasefire being driven by the same thing the last one was?